See the red light. All right. What I wanted to do is I wanted to jump back into I believe it's the power politics chapter this time. And I wanted to go back through a number of terms that several of y'all had missed on the quizzes. And I'm going to try and draw this out a little bit. And obviously it's going to be crude if you saw the last world picture that I drew the last time we were filming in this room. But having said that, balance of power, balance of threat, bandwagoning, and then also the preponderance theory are four theories that are out there that they talk about in reference to power politics. They talk about this in reference to how the world system works, especially since there isn't a world government. Now, if you wanted to go back in time and you want to take a look at balance of power, back in the aftermath of the World War II, you had the United States as being really the unquestioned power on the West. And then you had other countries, European countries, maybe like Great Britain, or maybe like France, or maybe like Spain, or maybe like West Germany. And the idea behind this, effectively, balance of power, is that really when you go back, you had the American side and the American allies that I'm going to have in blue, and then you had the old Soviet Union that I'm going to put up here in red. You had the old Soviet Union, and back in the day, of course, maybe you would have countries like Poland, or maybe you would have countries like East Germany, or maybe you would have countries like Czechoslovakia, or maybe, for that matter, you'd have a country like China. The idea behind balance of power, very simply, is this. What you would do is these two main powers would basically build up their own little networks that would surround them. And they would kind of act as a way to divide basically what the other side was doing. So you had the Soviet Union on one side with its allies. On the other side, particularly in the European theater, you'd have the United States with Great Britain. You'd have the United States with Spain and West Germany and France. And just like with the Soviet Union on the other side, they would all unite. Now, the trick with this, very simply, was this. Countries fight wars because they know that they're going to be able to win them. But if you balance the power, if you will, between both sides, so that in this instance you've got a big Soviet Union and basically four allies, although it would have been more than that. On this side you've got the big United States and you've got four allies there. Effectively what you've done is you've balanced Europe to the point where the United States and its allies don't know that they would be able to win, and the Soviet Union and its allies wouldn't know that they would be able to win, so nobody would ultimately ever attack. It's the idea that power is balanced on both sides, and since it's balanced, nobody is going to try and get involved in a conflict because that conflict would cost them an awful lot. This is basically what balance of power is. Now, you can take a look at this in a different regard when you come down here and you go to what is known as balance of threat. In the aftermath of World War II, you had the United States and you had the Soviet Union. You had two superpowers in the world. Well, today you have one superpower in the world, and that's the United States. The United States, if you added it all up, would have basically, if you added Japan and Germany and China and Britain and France and Italy, if you added the next 7 economies roughly in the world, they would add up to 1 year of the American economy. So when we say that China is growing, or when we say that Japan is an established country, or for that matter Germany or Britain or France, bottom line is that while they're established countries, it takes a group of them to equal up to what the United States is doing. There is only one superpower today. Now, since there's only one superpower, as of before, it was kind of the U.S. and the Soviet Union kind of going against each other. Well, now there's only the U.S. So instead of thinking about things in terms of balance of power, you would want to think about things in terms of balance of threat. And let me just give you some countries, and I'll put up some random ones. Let's say that you have Iran up here. And let's say that you have China over here. And let's say that you do still have a Great Britain and a France. Let's say that you've got a Canada over here. Let's say that you've got a Saudi Arabia on this side. And maybe even, let's say that you've got a country like Kenya to represent Africa, or Haiti, maybe a poor country that's out there in the world after you had done the Hunger Papers. Now, if I were to ask you who the biggest threat in the world was today, if I were to ask you who the biggest threat was in the world today, who would you answer? I think that it would be very easy in light of the news to say that North Korea is the biggest threat in the world. North Korea lining up these missiles, maybe even trying to get a shot at Hawaii, or at least to be able to demonstrate that they could hit Hawaii. Maybe you might take a look at the world and say that it would be a country like Syria or Saudi Arabia, a country that has oil like Saudi Arabia. They could influence the world very seriously just by what they choose to pump and what they choose to sell. Maybe a country like Syria because of terrorism. Some people would probably even say that maybe the biggest threat of all would be the country of Iran. Now, whether that's true or not is debatable, but if Iran develops nuclear weapons, the thought would be is that maybe they could be a threat to world peace. Again, I'm not saying that that's accurate or no, I'm just suggesting that that perception is out there. The idea behind balance of threat, very simply, is this. Let's say that Iran is the biggest threat to world peace today. Let's say that Iran is the biggest threat because of nukes or because of terrorism or whatever. What you would do in a balance of threat world is that you are actually going to group all of these other countries, and they are ultimately going to be linked to the most powerful country in the world, United States in this instance. But they're not necessarily going to be joining the United States per se, so much as they are going to be attempting to organize against the Iranians. The trick on this is that if the Iranians are the biggest threat in the world, then what you're going to want to do as the United States is balance all of these countries so that Iran is a country that is separated, that Iran is a country that's isolated, that quite frankly, Iran would be a country that's neutralized. This is basically what balance of threat is. Now, the problem with balance of threat is that, as I said, you could sit down and think about this, and you could come up with any number of countries that could be the biggest threat in the world. As I said, some people might take a look and say that China is the biggest threat because of their growing economy, maybe because of our dependence upon their economy. Some people might say that Saudi Arabia is the biggest threat because, indeed, of the oil wealth and the resources that they have. Some people might say that it would be a country like Iran because of the perception of terrorism or, for that matter, the potential for nuclear weapons. Here's the interesting one and the kicker, though. Some people might end up saying that really the biggest threat in the world isn't China, it's not Iran, it's not Saudi Arabia or Syria or North Korea or anybody like this. Some people out there would suggest that the biggest threat to world peace today is actually the United States. And the danger, if you will, of the idea behind balance of threat is that if you have a balance of threat situation, you could conceivably isolate this other country if you can correctly name them as the threat, or if you can't, you, as the United States, could conceivably be isolated in reference to the rest of the world community. So on its face, this sounds like a really, really good idea, but there is an awful lot of danger that's out there in terms of balance of threat. Bandwagoning. Let's come on down here, and let me draw this line fairly quickly. When you're dealing with bandwagoning, okay, in the first one, if you remember, you got more than one superpower, United States and Soviet Union. They are going to do their best to balance each other. In the second one, you've got one country out there that is a really big threat, and the world community is going to organize against them, to neutralize them, to isolate them. Maybe it would be a country like Iran, or maybe forebodingly enough, it could be a country like the United States. Well, here,